honored to be joined. And I believe his third trip around the block, at least on the Justice Hour, and a great guest indeed, gubernatorial candidate Jeff Johnson, seeking the Republican nomination for governor of the great state of Minnesota, is joining us today. Jeff was born in the great town of Detroit Lakes, the host of WeFest each year, along with a number of great golf tournaments up in Detroit Lakes. But I will tell you, WeFest, as I said last year, I do intend to attend this year, and I'm still on path to do so in August. It's a great event up in Detroit Lakes, the birthplace of Jeff Johnson. Jeff went on to Concordia College, Georgetown Law School, became a representative of the House of Representatives here in Minnesota from 2000 to 2006, has been a member of the Hennepin County Board as a Hennepin County Commissioner for a number of years, and I will tell you, ran a spirited campaign in 2014 as the Republican nominee for governor against incumbent Mark Dayton, outraising Mark Dayton in terms of funds and winning, in fact, the independent vote by some 10%. A strong candidate indeed in Jeff Johnson, and boy, the Republicans have to take the governor's house this time around, and Jeff Johnson could well do it. Jeff, how are you today?
I am doing great, Andy. How are you?
Doing very well. Thanks for being with us again on the Justice.
Absolutely. And that bumper song brings back Spring Break 1986 in South Padre Island.
Yeah, there it is. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Jeff, I wanted to have you on again, particularly at this time as we're coming into the hard-fought months leading up to the Republican convention. First let me talk to you a little bit about the politics, then I want to talk to you about some of the issues as well.
Sure.
The word out there is that potentially even this week, Tim Pawlenty's going to get in the race as it relates to the Republican endorsement. And, there's no doubt about it. He's a formidable candidate. He's very well known. He's got a lot of relationships across the board, across the state, I should say, as well as across the board in the Republican Party. How are you viewing Pawlenty getting into the Republican endorsement battle?
Well, we expect he gets in this week as well. In fact, it sounds like it's going to be tomorrow or Tuesday, and we've expected that for actually a few months. And so it doesn't really change a lot for me long term. I will still continue to fight for the endorsement and abide by the endorsement and feel very positive about where we're at, regardless of whether Tim gets in or not. I believe I'm going to get endorsed, but I got to keep working for it. Then I suspect he's going to force a primary, and that's politics, so we will deal with that. And I feel positive about that because I think you have Tim's a friend of mine, but you have a very stark choice between the two of us if you are a Republican who wants to win in November. And, it is the past versus the future. It is business as usual versus some real fundamental change in government. And I think it's the grassroots versus the donor class because that's who seems to be pushing his candidacy. And we've got literally thousands and thousands of grassroots Minnesotans who are already working on the campaign or are contributing 25 or 50 or $100 at the same time. So I believe that it'll be a good summer primary campaign. It'll be expensive and we'll have to have a few elbows, but I feel real positive about it.
Jeff, do you feel like you have the inside track as it relates to the delegates to the Republican convention where you'll come out with the endorsement?
I do, and that is based on, I got in some 10 months ago, as well as several other Republicans who've been in the race. And so I've been traveling around the state that entire time talking to the thousands of grassroots Republicans who have been part of this process, starting with caucus and then going through the convention. And I feel like we're in a really good spot. There is a lot of nostalgia about Tim, but interest, at least on the ground, in him getting in the race. I think people are excited about the candidates that are in now, and I feel right now that I'm in a really good spot. We won the caucus night straw poll by over 30 points over the next person, which is a larger win than anyone can remember in a contested race on caucus night. So I think that just gives an indication of where things are right now.
You know, you raised three big differences between you and Tim Pawlenty, and the middle of those three was, I think you stated, a business as usual versus broad, bold change. What do you mean by bold change if Jeff Johnson becomes governor of the state of Minnesota?
You know, I think the only way we fix many of the biggest problems we have in this state, like overtaxation and overregulation, and I could go on down the list, healthcare, is if we actually fundamentally change government, change the attitude in government, change the attitude in the state agencies. Right now, there is this overriding belief in state government that it is government's job to help us all make better decisions about our own lives. And there's this belief within our state agencies, whether it's the DNR or the PCA or the Department of Commerce, that their job is to direct us and to, in many cases, control us, as opposed to serve the people who pay their salaries. And that is a fundamental change that hasn't happened in a long time in Minnesota government. We did not see it happen under Tim. Tim did a good job of making his state agencies more efficient, but that's not going to solve a problem because they just switch it back as soon as the Democrats take over. We need to actually clean house in our state agencies. We need to get rid of the people in the state agencies who don't understand what their role is, which is a role of service as opposed to control. And that's the most fundamental change that has to take place. It will be extremely difficult. It will take many years, but that is where I will set my sights as governor.
Well, Jeff, I know that you're aware that I know quite a bit about this particular area because I've been practicing law and dealing with public sector employer related issues for a long time and dealing with the Public Employee Labor Relations Act here in Minnesota, which allows public sector employees to organize and bargain. Something that in Wisconsin they tipped on its head with when Scott Walker initiated complete change in the bargaining ability for public sector employees. Are you suggesting that we do the same sort of thing here in Minnesota? And secondly, are you suggesting that we do away with civil service laws as it relates to tenure and the ability to fire public sector employees?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as saying that you didn't say this, but I wouldn't go so far as saying that we should eliminate public sector unions. I think, people should have the right to bargain. However, when you look at what was going on in Wisconsin 10, 12 years ago and how imbalanced it was between taxpayers against public employee unions, Scott Walker did a great favor to the taxpayers of Wisconsin, and I would like to see us move in that direction. Part of that may be solved by the U.S. Supreme Court with the Janus case that is going to be decided in the next few months.
Yes,
and we might actually have right to work in Minnesota for public sector employees, not private sector employees. I think that would be a positive thing, and I think other states that have implemented that have seen it actually be a boon to their economy.
Yeah, and if you're not aware out there of the Supreme Court case, which is currently being considered, it is a case which challenges the public sector labor union's right to collect money from its members and then use it against a particular member's political ideas or interests. And so it would allow members to, or it would prevent public sector unions from requiring members to pay in. We are talking to Jeff Johnson. Jeff, can you stay with us on the other side?
Yes, I can.
Very good. We're going to talk further with Jeff about some important issues, so You stay with us as well, and in the meantime, go to parkerdk.com. It's our Politics, Israel, and the Law every week, Sunday at 4 o'clock. I'm not as lonely now as you are listening. Again, number 2 pencil, yellow pad, 651-289-4488. And if we have time, we will put you on the air. We have a number of people lining up, but I want to talk to Jeff Johnson, who is our special guest, and we're honored to have Jeff on the Justice Hour today. Jeff Johnson running for the Republican endorsement and then for a seat at the table in the governor's mansion as the governor of the state of Minnesota. As Mark Dayton is retiring, it is an open race. It looks like Tim Walz, who is outraising his Democrat opponents by several factors, will be the Democratic nominee. And I wanted to ask Jeff, if you're able to get through the process and the gauntlet of the endorsement process in the convention, as well as any primary that may result thereafter, what are the prospects against Democrat for you and specifically against Tim Walz? I will tell you, leading into your answer, Steyerwalt, who is often on Fox News, was talking about Minnesota as it relates to the Senate race and was saying this is a blue state, Tina Smith isn't going to get beat, et cetera, talking about the Senate race, but referring to Minnesota as a state where Republicans can't win statewide. And I think he's absolutely wrong about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. That's just silly. Well, the fact that we have a Republican Minnesota House and a Republican Minnesota Senate, and we've got 3 of the 8 congressional districts and 2 that could easily flip this election. And the fact that Donald Trump, who no one gave the slightest chance in Minnesota, came within a point and a half without really campaigning here. To say that it's a solid blue state is just, maybe it was 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know, but it certainly isn't today.
Well put.
And I would say, after being on the road for the last 10 months and even more importantly, spending a week at the state fair and talking to literally thousands of Minnesotans.
Where you were on the Justice Hour, as I recall.
Right. That's right. I think you kind of finished up the week there for me. It was right at the end. People in Minnesota are, number one, they're tired of party labels. There are so many who've said, yeah, I used to vote Democrat or I used to always vote Republican, but that doesn't mean as much to them anymore. They're looking for someone who is going to change government and who's going to give them a voice because they are just tired of the same old thing happening over and over again. Frankly, in some cases, regardless of which party is in control. So whether it's Tim Walz or Rebecca Otto or someone else, I feel like we're going to be able to enter that race this fall or late summer with a fairly clean. If I'm the candidate, with a fairly clean slate and a really good chance of winning.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Jeff, along those lines, coming up in a few weeks and possibly even next week, we're going to have John the Machinist on the Justice Hour. John lives in one of the furthest out rings of the metro area. I wouldn't call it suburban. It's closer to rural areas. He works at a machinist shop. He was a Trump voter, and he's going to talk about the day-to-day issues that he thinks about, exactly on par, I believe, with what you were just talking about in terms of what people are looking for, different from what they have gotten over the last many decades from politicians.
Yeah, and I would say when I look at where the DFL party is right now, again, regardless of their candidate, because they're all, even Walz, who has kind of run as this moderate rural Democrat, his record hasn't really matched that, but that has been his aura. He's running so far left to try to get through this process that it makes your head spin. And I talk to Minnesotans who aren't aligned with the party, and they are starting to recognize that the leadership, at least, of the DFL party has become so obsessed with these fringy issues that don't matter to them at all that they've kind of lost track of normal Minnesotans and the worries that we all have about, whether it is your job or paying rent or buying health insurance or saving for your kids' education. And they're talking about, what pronoun to use to describe a kid or which bathroom to use or protecting violent protesters who are blocking traffic or giving driver's license to illegal aliens. And those issues are not driving normal people to the polls in a positive way. So I just think we got a great shot.
You're listening to Andrew Parker and Jeff Johnson talking on the Justice Hour about the upcoming gubernatorial race. Jeff, you're absolutely right about the fringe element issues that the Democrats continue to talk about. We're going to talk about that on the Justice Hour in the next segment a little bit. The latest Women's March, where they embraced the anti-Semite Louis Farrakhan during the march, which is absolutely outrageous. Farrakhan, the one who said that all whites should die. It reflects where the Democrat Party is heading. And, in many respects, it underscores the understanding of why Donald J. Trump was able to win an astounding surprise election this last go-around. Jeff, do you consider yourself a Trump guy?
Well, yeah. I mean, I am a supporter and was a supporter before he was elected. I know a lot of Republicans who were never Trumpers until he was elected and then changed their tune, which is fine. But I actually supported him before he was elected and did so in an op-ed in the Star Tribune. Our styles differ. I mean, I'm a Norwegian Lutheran from northern Minnesota, so I don't
That's
have
not Donald Trump.
No, it's not. So I don't have the same personality as he does. But I think what he's trying to do, sometimes successfully and sometimes not, is right for the country. We're not always going to agree, but yes, absolutely, I'm a supporter. And, I sometimes hear opponents of his, or maybe even not opponents, but people will say, well, he won because he was so angry, and so you have to be angrier as a candidate. I don't believe for a second that he won because he was angry. He showed anger, and we all have that. I think he won because he gave people some hope that he was actually going to change something and their voice would be heard, because so many people in this country and in this state just feel like they've been ignored for decades. And, kind of the working class in this state feel like all the focus is either on the bottom of the economic ladder in this state or wealthy people who don't need a lot of help. And he actually gave them a voice. And I think that's the ticket to winning in the fall.
And amazingly, he is getting things done. He is shaking things up on foreign policy for sure and getting things done. And I'm going to talk a little about that in the next segment as well. But also here at home, what do you think about the federal tax reform bill, and how does that translate here in Minnesota?
I think it's good. I think it was a very, very positive thing. I think that the simpler you can make taxes and, frankly, the lower you can bring them, the better. And what it did in Minnesota was it alerted people to the fact that we are an extremely high-tax state. And unless we do something about that, Minnesotans are going to suffer. So my hope is that they will take at least a step in the right direction during this current session. And then next year, when I'm governor with the Republican House and Senate, we can actually fundamentally reform taxes in Minnesota. What I tend to point out to people about our taxes is we're in the top 8 in almost every major tax category. But the one that is the biggest problem is the income tax. Our top income tax rate is completely out of whack. I think everybody knows that we tax rich people too much in this state. But the bigger problem is our lowest income tax rate. It's higher than the highest rate in 22 other states. So we are not just overtaxing rich people. We are overtaxing everybody who pays more than $10,300 or who makes more than $10,350 a year, which means pretty much everybody. And that just has to change.
When you say we're overtaxing rich people, you've got a lot of folks out there listening who squirm in their seat and wonder what you mean by that. I assume that where you're going there is that the only way to grow the economy is to allow people to have money to invest in their business.
Yes, and we also want people who are wealthy and successful to stay here when they retire rather than move somewhere else. I know an awful lot of people who are successful and wealthy, who pay a lot in taxes, who contribute a lot to charitable causes and are leaders in their community, who, when they retire, would prefer to spend a majority of the year in Minnesota and a minority of the year in Florida or some other warmer, low-tax state. But they choose to do it the other way because our tax laws are just so punitive in this state. And this happens, every single year by the thousands. There are studies out there that show that we are losing tens of millions of dollars in tax revenue because we are chasing people out who are successful.
Well, it's the kind of policy that you're suggesting by not chasing those people out,
right,
that is going to protect the revenue coffers for the state of Minnesota. We've been talking to Jeff Johnson, running for governor of the state of Minnesota on the Republican side, and it's going to be an endorsement battle that he's going to have and possibly a primary battle. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us again on the Justice Hour, and we hope to have you on again down the trail.
Thank you, Andy. I enjoyed it.
Take care. Be well. So stay with us on the Justice Hour.